Serious question. Can you remind me, Dave, what was the name of the song? You know, Absolute Bangers, we did the last podcast. Mm-hmm. What's the name of the song that you chose? Because I need to hear it and I need to, fucking listen to it. It was Doobie Brothers.
Taking It to the Streets.
Yeah, I need to listen to that.
John McDonald. Yeah, it's a beast.
Awesome. Taking It to the Streets. Okay. I'm committing that.
Or you could go back and listen to episode 2 of the Cacophony Sessions podcast, which is available everywhere.
Even if you listen to it, listen to it again because it's multi-layered. We did it like that, so you probably missed some shit that went over your head. So just re-listen.
There's a lot of hidden messages as well. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, if you play it backwards, you'll hear all sorts of things going on.
Listen to the podcast. Good evening, Funketeers, and thanks for joining us for the 3rd episode of the Cacophony Sessions podcast. It's a hot one. Tonight...
It's a hot one.
It is a hot one. Tonight, let me get this again.
That's what I'm doing.
You've got to keep that in.
I'm keeping that. Tonight, our conversational ship has discovered the ability to sail back in time as we visit the 2000s. Before we get down and dirty with the Noughties, though, let's find out who's joining me tonight. For this episode, we've got Dave, Tom, Martyn, and we have a new challenger making his way to the ring from unknown parts, Alex.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Al. Before we let you loose, we need to know 2 things. What's the best year in music, and what song would you say is an undeniable banger?
I'm really glad you asked because I have 2 sheets of paper in front of me. Right, I got 3, and I had to cut a 4th because I think it's been a bit overplayed, so you guys would hate it. But everyone likes Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think anyone who doesn't like it. If it came on, if you're a bit pissed. Of course, Tom doesn't like it.
Are we even allowed to still like Michael Jackson anymore, or is that a different debate?
Let's save that for a different episode. I think that's a discussion in itself.
It's fair game. I've also got Sham 69, Hurry Up Harry.
We're going down the pub.
We're going down the pub.
Oh, I know that one. We're going down the pub.
Yeah.
I went to a Sham 69 gig where they dedicated that song to a fan that was in a coma. It was called Harry.
Wow.
I'd love to see them live. Apparently they've split into 2 bands. It's like the singer quit, so the original people kept going. But then the singer decided to start going with Sham 69. So now there's 2 Sham 69s apparently.
Yeah.
What are we trying to want to watch?
I don't know if that song's a banger. I'm not sure.
I don't actually know it.
If you listen to it, you'd know it instantly.
I know it, but I don't think I'd say it's a banger. Sorry.
Dare you. Okay, this didn't make the cut, but this is why the cut. Was Journey Don't Stop Believing?
Oh, fuck off. That song.
Everyone likes that song.
The only good thing about this, no,
I'm with Martyn on this. No,
I do not like that song. The only good thing about that song is the end of The Sopranos. That's the only decent reason why that song should exist.
you don't love it because of Glee, then, Martyn?
Oh man, it's a terrible song. It's horrible. It's bad in every way.
Any pub around this country. It doesn't matter what your opinion is because it's undeniable.
Yeah,
I think it's a tune. I know.
No.
Yeah, I know it's obvious. It's not
as good as any way you want it.
Next.
Yeah, keep moving.
I just thought anything that everyone would like sing along to in the pub. So like, I mean, Wonderwall could have gone on here. You know what I mean? But But like I put in Bonnie Tyler, Total Eclipse of the Heart. Everyone likes that song, but everyone likes it.
No, I don't. I don't like that.
I mean, I know it's the new guy. You're supposed to ease your way in, not just boring.
He's coming windmilling and causing chaos already.
Keys in his hands.
I don't know. I reckon that was.
See, you did take a similar approach to this as I thought I did. But the only difference is that I did it with like the sort of like early 2000s indie kid approach, whereas you did it with at a pub, which I appreciate. But in our little echo chamber or our court of opinion, we don't like those songs.
We don't.
I was wrong. Like, not on my constant rotation either.
Sorry.
Okay, Alex, is that been your choice? Okay, because
Yeah, my choice.
none of us agree with your choices. We all think your choices are bad, and you need to go back and listen to a bit more punk or something.
Or just give us a year that we can argue with instead.
Yeah, go for that. Yeah.
I'll give you a year then. Well, I'll do that. I've got such a list of albums on it. Like, the problem is because when I was like thinking of stuff, I actually completely forgot to do this. So I only did it like half an hour before the time I thought we were going to start recording. So I just like went, okay, this year.
Good
So
man.
I didn't go for necessarily the best year because I couldn't be bothered to go through every year one at a time. But I did pick the one year which essentially kickstarted my music, like just enjoy music too as a hobby rather than just whatever's on the radio.
Yeah.
But the first time I ever was just like, wow, that's awesome. And it's probably showing, how young I am. But it was in 1999 when The Offspring played on Top of the Pops. It was the first time I would have experienced anything like that, really, because none of my parents ever listened to like punk music or anything like that. And it was just on Top of the Pops, and they were playing live. I actually went back and listened to it as I was thinking about it. So because of that, I just thought 1999 for me is the year I started properly listening to music. So I just went on Google and thought 1999 best albums of it. So most of these I probably still haven't even listened to, but I think, well, these guys might have heard of them.
Yeah.
So what? Californication by Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Shit album.
No, it is not, Martyn.
Oh, come on.
That's for me when the downturn started with Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Absolutely.
See, I'm with Alex on this. I would actually. This is the first time. This is probably the first and only time Alex will ever agree on anything. But Californication is a great album.
No, it's not.
Oh, God.
It is.
Oh, compare it to One Hot Minute, man, with Dave Navarro on guitar. It's just like
Literally no one else agrees with you, Martyn. No one likes that album. Like, even in Red Hot Chili Peppers circles, like go on YouTube and put in the music video for that album. I guarantee it's got the least views of any of them.
doesn't matter, man.
Also, without jumping on the bandwagon and slating you, Alex, because I've only just met you, but popularity does not indicate quality. So the Smurfs Go Pop was a very popular album, but it's absolute dog shit.
I think it's a way of like, okay, not necessarily, obviously, like if you put in like the Cheeky Girls or something, that's probably gonna have more views than like, I don't know, a band I like, for example. I can understand that when you're comparing bands. I don't think it really makes sense.
But the Red Hot Chili Peppers is an incredible band. It's just that album, in my opinion, is not their greatest work.
Yeah, they're a great band. They're an amazing band, and each musician in their own right are fucking incredible. Every single one of them, except for Anthony Kiedis. He is just the most boring vocalist I've ever heard. He's like the Robbie Williams of alternative rock.
I don't think he's that great, but
I prefer his early stuff when he was more kind of a faux rapper, kind of. He was more percussive in his approach to rather than trying to sing melodies. It was more about the rhythm, and that's when they were good for me. The early stuff.
Dan, you've hit the nail on the head. Actually, is like when Anthony Kiedis was trying to do the whole rap thing, and he was trying to be rhythmic with it.
Yeah,
I think you're dead on with that. He was great with that, but like when he tries to sing soul, it doesn't work. He doesn't have the voice. He really doesn't.
Yeah. I do want to get off of Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm acutely aware of the fact that we've probably got people listening and going, right, I'm waiting for this band to be mentioned, and they haven't mentioned it in 3 episodes. And yeah, the Cheeky Girls have already got a mention.
Smurfs Goes Pop, that's one.
I'll go past the first album on the list. Okay, Battle of Los Angeles by Rage Against the Machine.
Oh, yes.
I've never heard it because I'm not particularly a big fan. Sorry, mine. But 9 Inch Nails, Fragile.
That is
The Fragile is like probably one of the greatest albums ever recorded.
I like the single on it.
Oh my God.
Don't get him started.
Don't get me started on 9 Inch Nails, right?
Okay. Right, the next one is the Slim Shady LP. It's Eminem's first album.
Yeah, that's my favourite Eminem album.
Not his first album, but carry on.
Well, I know he didn't have some weird ones from when he lived in the trailer park still. I can't remember what it's called.
Loads of fucking shit. He did I had one that I downloaded off Napster that he did with an artist called Scam. It was called like Welcome to Hell or something. I suppose it is classed as an EP, basically, not an album. But yeah,
I think there's one song, I can't remember what was it, something like weird, like I generally can't remember what it's called, but apparently he thought that was going to be his like big break and went absolutely nowhere, and he was really depressed for like a year. I don't know where I heard that. It must have been an interview. Anyway, fuck it. The next one is Sigur Rós.
Oh, mate.
Yeah. A guided version.
Sounds like you've just passed the audition now.
Yeah, you definitely have.
I nearly didn't pick 2003 and nearly picked another year because I wanted a year a Sigur Rós album came out in, because their first albums I don't like. Okay, Von.
What's wrong?
Von, I don't like Von. Yeah, I don't like Von.
Virgin.
A Guided Virgin is their second album. Von I don't like. A Guided Virgin is brilliant. The Untitled album's beautiful, but it doesn't have A Guided Virgin is probably the heaviest until their more recent stuff.
Yeah, that's the album. That's the only album I've heard.
A Jesus Version is fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a groundbreaking album.
It is good. It is good.
The sonic soundscapes on that album are just so amazing.
Can I go on with the list? Because I think we're on number 5.
Carry on.
Anyway,
Carry on.
Sigur Rós.
I promise not to stop on this one because I've also not heard this, but this is purely to get brownie points. Mogwai, Come On Dies Young.
Mate.
You really are. You're pushing mine and Martyn's buttons. And,
totally.
And the only 1999 was on my short list, but I don't actually know why I didn't go for it. But that isn't the best Mogwai album. By a long way, it's not the best Mogwai album, but it is a very good album.
I'll plow through. So Moby Play, never really listened to it, but
great album.
A great album. Yeah, it's very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Stereophonics, Performance and Cocktails.
Yeah, again, a good album, man.
Okay, so there's Foo Fighters, There Is Nothing Left to Lose.
Oh, mate. Sounds like a Pearl Jam album, but
It's the one that got really popular, isn't it? Like, it had a lot of big singles on it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it had like the songs about Courtney Love on it and stuff. And it was a really good album, but I will say it does sound like a Pearl Jam B-sides album musically.
That's fair enough.
It's all right. It's okay.
I've got Blink 182, sorry, Enema of the State.
Yeah, I loved that album at the time.
I've got, some of you guys might like it, but I generally still probably enjoy it. It's Limp Bizkit, Significant Other. that essentially just made new metal a thing overnight.
Again, with Limp Bizkit, I think we talked about this before in previous podcasts about like the new metal bands where the musicianship was fucking spot on, but the attitude and the lyrics were really bad. I
100% admit in hindsight, it's quite bad. But when you're 13, 14-year-old guy, and you hear break stuff, I don't care who you are, it's just like, yeah, it's hardly poetry now, but
absolutely.
I think I have a hard time finding anyone who was in their teens around that time who did, for at some point, really like Limp Bizkit. So Britney Spears' first album, big year for her.
Yeah.
Backstreet Boys' Millennium. I'm not sure if was that good, Will?
Okay, the Backstreet Boys are not really an album artist. They're singles artists, so it's difficult to say if Millennium is good. It has some good singles on it, but it's not really a good cohesive album. There we go.
Okay. All right, there was Macy Gray, Oh How Life Is. Was that her big one?
It's got the big single, I Tried.
Macy Gray, the Marge Simpson of pop.
There was Muse, Showbiz.
Oh, what a good album. Yeah,
man.
It's a good album. Yeah.
It's probably the worst album. Well, actually, no. Worst album past when I stopped listening.
Yeah, so it's their worst album up to
Absolution.
Black Holes and Revelations.
Yeah, I would say Black Holes and Revolutions is where they kind of went a bit.
I would say the Muse peaked on Origin of Symmetry.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that a bit later.
Yeah, we will definitely be talking about that later.
I've got Korn Issues. That was a big album if you were a Korn fan.
No.
Probably not many on this podcast.
No.
I listened to Follow the Leader the other day. That came out in 98. It's not aged well in places.
I always thought that was a pretty bad album, to be honest, anyway.
Yeah, it's not great.
But
anyway.
to be fair to you, Alex, man, like Korn were a groundbreaking band. They one of the most important alternative rock bands of our time, I think. So you're right on in saying that.
Well, if you don't like them, I mean, you still can't deny that some of the riffs are just fucking...
Exactly. And that low-end bass, man.
Down tune it to some fucking ludicrous level.
Yeah.
You just see strings like slow-mo slapping on the videos. It was just ridiculous.
Like, I dare anyone to listen to Falling Away From Me and not, like, just bop your head. You know what I mean? There's no way. Dun, 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 dun. Actually, no, it's a different one. Doesn't matter. Same riff, like, for half an hour. But who cares? The riff. The Korn riff is awesome. Burn the Priest, so Lamb of God's first album. For any black metal fans out there, Immortal at the Heart of Winter. If anyone likes In Flames, Colony. What people would consider Dream Theater's best album, not my personal, but what a lot of people would consider Metropolis Part 2.
Dream Theater were amazing, man. They still are. You know.
Yeah. There's still Neon Ballroom.
Iron Maiden left off, basically.
Did you say Neon Ballroom then?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
Silverchair.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man, what a fucking cool album that was.
Really like
Silverchair, they were fucking awesome. They were really, really good.
Aussies.
Yeah, they were, but I think they were, yeah.
Good choice, man.
Okay, one of my personal favourites, I really love this album to this day. It was when it was like peak punk pop for me, but the Get Up Kids, Something to Write Home About. That's really good. I'm not sure you guys will listen to it.
No, I haven't heard that.
So good. There's Will Haven, WHVN.
Yeah.
I love Will Haven. There's AFI, Black Sails in the Sunset. It's the first real album that kind of made their sound. That wasn't their first album, essentially. You know, that's the AFI sound that everyone heard after. There's Incubus, Make Yourself.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good album.
Yeah.
That is a good album.
A big one, which is awesome, is Neurosis, Time of Grace.
Very influential on a lot of bands that I love, but not an album I find easy to listen to.
There's Feeder, Yesterday Went Too Soon.
Oh, Feeder.
That's my favourite Feeder album.
I loved Feeder. Their first album, they tried so hard to sound like the Smashing Pumpkins early in the day, and they did a really good job of it. And I've got so much time for Grant Nicholas. He's such a good songwriter. Yeah, Feeder, man, they were a good band.
I thought it was their best album. I've got
Echo Park, still Echo Park.
No, it's got to be the first. It's got to be Polythene. You know, like I lump Feeder in the same place as I put Bush. You know, like kind of that post grunge thing where they listened to a lot of the Pixies and stuff, and they were doing that whole thing. But Feeder, man, like, they're really strong songs. Really strong.
Yeah. I've got 4 more left. Static X, Wisconsin Death Trip.
Stupid haircut. Yeah.
It's a very stupid haircut, but if anyone likes Static X as a first album, and it was very good. There's Jimmy Eat World, Come Clarity. Some people think it's their best album. I'm not one of them, but I really, really like it. And a very important one for metal in general, it's Slipknot's self-titled album, the first one.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And my personal favourite of the whole year, last but not least, Dillinger Escape Plan, Calculating Infinity.
Dillinger Escape Plan, one of the few bands I really enjoyed live, but I find it really difficult to listen to any of their records.
Man, that album was like, that was the album that sent me down the more complicated, the better route for about 10 years, which I'm not in anymore. I wouldn't enjoy as much as I did before, but yeah, for a while, that was the album for me.
From Mal, we'll certainly figure out your tastes and what you're going to bring to the podcast with that little introduction there. So thank you for that. What's everyone else been doing?
I'll take the lead.
Yeah,
I've been back at work, which is good and bad. Which means I've had less time to be looking at music and chatting with you guys, and my phone's broken, so I'm not able to join in on the group chats, which has been a bit annoying, but I've sorted it, so it should be sorted in the next couple of days. But yeah, I've mainly just been I've been buying a lot of vinyl on Discogs again, so when it turns up in the poster, I've been slamming it on. I'm trying to move my album collection that I play out all onto 45, because I just prefer it to play out. So I've just been rebuying stuff I've already got, Ready for the World was the last 45 I got through, and before that I got
fantastic.
I got The Time, Jungle Love.
Yeah, boy.
What was the last other 45 to land? Oh, Agira, which is some Portuguese funk, basically. But,
awesome. Yeah. Tom, what have you been doing?
Is it next weekend or the week after? So it gets to August, and every August since 2013, I've been going to the same festival, Arc Tangent Festival, and obviously coronavirus has got rid of that. It will be back again next year, and I will be going. It's definitely a festival worth going to for everybody. It's about 5,000 people. The bands they have are cracking. But I've been going back through every year. I went through a phase where every year I went, I bought everything that every band that were playing had released to listen to it and work out who I was going to see, because Martyn and Dan will know that's the sort of thing I would do.
Indeed.
So I was going back, listening through and just discovering old gems that played that I really enjoyed at the festival. So I was starting listening back through all the stuff from 2013, and Arcane Roots are the band that I've really, and that I was listening to a lot, because I didn't really like them live at the festival, but their albums are really, really good. There's a track called Belief, which is it's like a big American power ballads done clever and heavy, and that was really good. And then I was listening to And So I Watch You From Afar, All Hail Bright Futures. That is an album about how to play guitar. Martyn, you need to listen to that. Imagine a heavy Marnie Stern, and you've got a pretty good idea of what that album's like. It's basically listening to lots of post-rock and math rock very loud, and doing my best to get my girlfriend and her little boy into listening to weird music. He really liked Arcane Roots. He also was headbanging to Godspeed You Black Emperor as well, so that kid's got taste. He's only 16 months old, but I've already ruined his music taste. So that's what I've been up to this week.
Martyn, what have you been up to?
I've just got back to work, which is cool, after my broken shoulder thing, and I spent a few long, dark nights of the soul on my own in my room, listening to music. I've really got a helmet recently, fucking post-hardcore, really heavy, sludgy guitar stuff, riffs and all the rest of it. I've been basically, making my silly little Fender Stratocaster sound like a Gibson Les Paul, and double tracking guitars and recording fucking heavy as fuck guitar stuff. So Helmet's the band for me at the moment. I've stopped listening to them. They're amazing.
Al, is there anything that you've been listening to lately you want to share?
I've been listening to okay, well, my job's actually really good for listening to stuff because I literally just I see something on a screen and then type it in directly because I work for Royal Mail. And so I just literally get 7 hours a day just listening to stuff. To be honest, most of it's just podcasts or it's audio books, but I do listen to music. I'm a chronic shuffler, to be honest. So like I'm really bad with albums. Like my favorite albums at the moment, or what I've been really listening to, like they're quite heavy. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of any of these bands, but there's one band called Jesus Piece. And they're definitely along the sort of hardcore route, like mine said, but more like New York style hardcore, I guess, but with kind of metal as well. But yeah, their first album at the moment it's absolutely amazing. If you guys will listen to anything heavy, I'd really recommend that because it's just a belter, you know, like proper just chugging, you know. I've also been listening to a band called Drain. It's another kind of hardcore band. They're really new on the scene, but they're from California and they kind of just look like a bunch of surfer dudes, but their first album is really, really good. It's probably my favorite album of the year so far.
Oh, okay.
Everything's perfect for me. Good riffs. I love the vocalists. I always kind of like higher pitched, kind of like yelling vocals, I guess. So yeah, it's really awesome. Here we go.
The main bulk of tonight's episode is going to be focused on a discussion on the decade, which is from 2000 to 2009, sometimes known as the Noughties. We really wanted to get stuck into just a dissection of what was good about that decade, what was bad about that decade, the best, the worst of, just really kind of see what we can come up with in terms of what people should be taking from that period of music, what they should be listening to, maybe some rants about particularly awful songs. I know I've got a couple that I've been saving for this occasion. Do we want to start off by talking about the good, or do we want to start off talking about the bad?
Let's start slagging off.
Yeah,
I reckon.
Right, let's take the gloves off then.
The worst trend of the 2000s is by far, and it's so easy, it's just auto-tune.
Oh my god, you've stolen my fucking worst of the 2000s thing. Auto-tune. Yeah.
I was on Wikipedia just to make sure it was in the 2000s. So annoyingly, auto-tunes, it was in fact like developed and released in 97, and the first ever auto-tune song was in 98 with Cher, Believe.
Cher, Believe, yeah.
But the 2000s is when it was just rampant. Anyone who just sing can now magically sing. I mean, Britney Spears couldn't sing for shit, could she? So and they got popular. She got Spice Girls. Everyone, they couldn't sing at all.
Yeah, I think a lot of weak voices were able to get passable records due to autotune, and that is a large problem in that decade, I think.
It's not even just pop songs; it's like metal songs and everything. It's just,
I think there are some benefits to autotune though, in that like. I think that I having played in a band that made a record with autotune, using autotune at time, I think it can be a very good way if you've got a really, really good song and a great songwriter. I think it allows them to get their message across in a more polished way, and I think that's quite a good thing because it allows music to be made that is deeply creative by somebody who doesn't have the greatest singing voice. Imagine how big Leonard Cohen would be if he'd had autotune.
Oh yeah.
But on the flip side of that, and it will lead into one of my things that I'll talk about as a worst thing later, I think it was overused and deliberately made to sound dodgy. Like it was almost like, particularly with Cher's track, it was deliberately done so it sounded like the auto-tune was on, and I don't like that. That really bugs me.
Well, like the best way of thinking about it, I think, so I don't mind auto-tune if it's used right. But think of it this way, right? So I think of it as, if you use auto-tune a bit like a guitar, you would use an effects pedal, right? If you play something awesome on a guitar, you can put an effects pedal and it sounds really good. It can sound way better. But it still means you still have to be able to play it on guitar. It's the same, with vocals, isn't it? Like if you can sing and you want to make it sound a bit cool, a bit electronic, like I don't know, what are they called, like Daft Punk or something. Fair enough. It sounds awesome. Everyone can appreciate it. But as soon as if they can't sing and there's and they've literally got to lip sync live, you know what I mean? Because they can't sing. That's when it's just rubbish. It's just, especially with such good music out there, to promote that crap. It's just unreal.
It should be used, I think, as an effect rather than a corrective tool.
Exactly.
So, I mean, the share song, I actually don't mind the use of it on there. It's a gimmick.
It's obvious. It's what makes a song that song, you know?
Yeah.
It has its uses, but for the most part, it ruined music for a long time. It never really recovered, I don't think.
Well, it's still going.
Auto-tune has become the norm now, and that's the problem. It's a really great effect, and when it's used right, it's okay. But it's very rare that
Post Malone is a great example of someone who's made a lot of money off of fuck all.
He's got there is a decent Post Malone song though. Post Malone's got a song called Circles, which is quite good. So yeah, for the Post Malone fans listening, we're not entirely against Post Malone.
I like that really big one he had, like Rockstar. And then what's it like? Better now. You only say that because I'm not around. I love that.
Yeah, he's done some good stuff. What was the best trend?
Well, okay, so this is going to annoy you guys probably, but I have to say it because the thing that got me into metal, I love metal, it's my favourite genre in the world. The thing that got me into metal is new metal. So unfortunately, new metal never released LD50. I would not listen to anything heavier than The Offspring.
See, I wouldn't have. I always think of new metal as a late 90s thing rather than a 2000s thing, but I guess it's big in the 2000s.
People made new metal from about 95 to about 2015, and then people just keep listening to the records. They're just done.
I would say so, yeah. No, yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I think we did talk about new metal a little bit in episode 1. And I think we kind of established that the 2000s was when they found a way of making it commercial, and so you had a lot of stuff like Limp Bizkit getting like #1 hits and things like that, suddenly going mainstream. And I think I can't say it's the best trend of the 2000s simply because of who I'm calling Chockums, because he is the Aldi equivalent of M&M's. Yeah, Limp Bizkit, they're just I cannot abide them. It's just they've got I'll give them Rearranged. I think is a great song, but you can undo a good favour with something like their cover of Behind Blue Eyes. I mean, you listen to that and you listen to the Who's original, and it's just I can't get behind it.
I'd never heard the other version.
That's probably one of the worst cover versions that's ever been recorded.
But they were also responsible for such absolute cataclysms as covers of. They did Faith by George Michael, which is absolutely horrendous, and they did I've seen a live version of 1999 as well, without bringing Prince up too much already. Yeah, exactly. Take a drink, but yeah, I mean, you don't touch that song anyway, but certainly not by Limp Bizkit.
I know there was a lot of that crap, and I agree. If you listen back, it's horrific. But if you were there, if you watch Break Stuff live, I don't care who you are, it's just an amazing bloody tune, you know?
You cannot deny how fucking awesome the riffs were, and the musicianship, the band.
Yeah, I mean, Wes Borland, I think, was the guitarist.
Yeah,
he's a decent
genius.
He's a decent musician. I just think the presence of Fred Durst is.
It's all about Fred Durst,
and therefore I have to dismiss Limp Bizkit. However, I will say, and the reason why I brought this up is I don't think I would say that new metal was the worst trend. There's a lot of good music. There is a lot of good music now.
So my question to you guys is the first thing I want clarification on. There are 3 bands. Are we classing them as new metal? Slipknot, are they new metal?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No, they're not. No, Slipknot, no new metal. They're new thrash.
Okay. Incubus.
No, they are
because they started as a new metal band.
Alternative rock.
Yeah. What you're saying is, the problem is with new metal is essentially anything that was on Kerrang or MTV2 between these years.
Yeah.
See, my favourite band of the 2000s, and probably definitely top 3 favourite bands of all time, is Areogram. And if you bought a Kerrang new metal CD in about 2003, Areogram were on there. Now there is no way in hell that Areogram are a new metal band.
They are not.
But the track Wood got grouped in with.
Areogram are post rock.
Yeah. Well.
Oh no.
Interestingly, they wouldn't class themselves as, and I don't think I would either.
But they were post rock.
Let's not get too indulged in
the new metal mind.
how we label our shoe boxes.
Yeah, that's good point, Dave. What else did you have down? Because you said you categorised it quite well.
Oh, well, I thought everyone else can think of their own trend if they want, but if we want to go to the next one, for me, it was albums and songs.
Yeah, do it.
So albums, like, I only thought, I can't really give an opinion on my favourite album of the 2000s unless I owned it. Because, like, I can't say, the worst of, whatever it's Paris Hilton's, because I never listened to it. I don't know if it's any good or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I had to, off the top of my head, think of the worst album I own, which happens to be in the 2000s. And I'm kind of ashamed to own it. But it's actually known as the worst Insane Clown Posse album.
Oh,
that's a low bar already.
So it's Insane Clown Posse. They had a split album. It was 2 albums, both called Bizarre. One was like eyes pictures and one with question marks. And the Bizarre, the second one, Bizarre, is the one I had when I was a kid, and it was with the BIZZAR, and the other one is BIZAAR. And I actually listened to it today at work just to remind myself how atrocious it was.
wow.
And honestly, you need to listen to it. It's that bad. Like, if you talk about Limp Bizkit at their most hateable, try Insane Clown Posse during their metal years.
Wow.
All I know is what's that documentary about the Juggalos, and then I'm out.
Oh, man, it's actually hilarious how bad it is. Like, right, when you're a kid and you buy an album when you were like quite young, and even if it's rubbish, the fact you bought it, you kind of half convince yourself you liked it. Like, there must be loads of albums where I've been like, yeah, that was really good, and then about a year later, I'm like, that was awful. Why did I listen to that?
Yeah.
And this album here, even at the time, I couldn't even kid myself. I was like, this is truly atrocious. Like, I'll do my favourite album then. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, or you might have heard of the band, but it's just straight up my favourite album from the 2000s. It's Coheed and Cambria in Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3.
Yes, what an album.
It's one of my favourite albums of all time, and it's happened to be in the 2000s. And if none of you guys have listened to it, it's a very 2000s thing. So it kind of caught the start of that emo phase where like high-pitched vocals are completely acceptable for men to do.
The first 4 Coheed albums I absolutely loved. Don't really love anything since. So I saw them live last year, and they only really play the new stuff, and I was really disappointed. But
man, because I loved Coheed and Cambria's first 2 albums, and then they had their third album. Then I think it was called Welcome Home, was a song in the Guitar Hero games, which got really popular. And I always got annoyed because their best album was the previous album, but the one that points to as their best is the one that just isn't. And then after that, they kind of lost something that they're all about, because it's all about song structures with them. They're a bit poppy, sort of pop rock, but they have such they'll have verse chorus, 5 minutes of going off on one, and have the catchiest parts of the songs, and then come back to the last chorus. And after the first 2 albums, they stopped doing that 5 minutes going off on one. And it just became really boring after that. But
I'm with you. I love the first album, because it's Second Stage Turbine Blade, isn't it? It's the first album. I loved that album. Absolutely rinsed that album. It's great. That was. There were a couple of bands and solo artists in the 2000s who did that, particularly in the sort of more rocky area, who did that sort of concept where they did the comic book and then the album to go with it, because that's how Coheed started. And I know actually it's 2010, so it doesn't count. So I'm going to stop on that one. I know there are a few, but the only other one that I actually bought was Melissa Alftemar's second album, which was really, really good album, but that's 2010, I think, so I can't use it. So I'm going to stop.
It's 2009 is when it counts up.
I can't use after 2009, apparently. Dan said 2000 to 2009.
Them's the rules, dude.
2010 is a different decade.
But they're my 2 albums I could come off with off the top of my head. There's probably loads of good albums, but that was one. I would have, if my favourite album of all time is actually Lit, Place in the Sun. But that was 99, but it managed to get like their 3rd single into 2000, so I was almost tempted.
You could have. That's tenuous, man. That's tenuous.
I tried.
Let's talk about songs.
Okay, songs. My most hated song of the 2000s, and it was actually really easy for me, was Daniel Powter, Bad Day.
Yes, that is a hateful song.
I had a bad day. And I just from the very first time I heard it to the very last time I heard it, which is all the goddamn time, it's awful. I hate the idea that someone sat down to write a song. And what has everyone got in, what got in common? Well, I guess everyone has a bad day. Right, I'm going to write 3.5 minutes of absolute rubbish based around that. And everyone's going to like it because, hey, we have bad days. It's just pandering crap.
It's the Lewis Capaldi of its time.
Well, in drawing comparisons, I would say that the Lighthouse Family, it's basically the Lighthouse Family Stone, isn't it? It's like it's one of those songs that they'll play on Radio 2 all the time, like the Lighthouse Family's Lifted, and it seems to sell records, but nobody will ever admit to buying them. And I think Bad Day by Daniel Powter is a culprit that shares a similar kind of.
It says a lot that he nobody knows his name anymore.
He's the shaky head guy.
Well, it's One Hit Wonder.
That was the first CD I ever bought, the Lighthouse Family, with my mum, because we held on to vinyl for such a long period and she really liked that album. So we had to go splits on it.
It's better than my first. My first was Spice Girls.
Mine was also the Spice Girls.
I'm sorry for ripping into the Lighthouse Family, man. If that was your first album,
man, that album sucks. Next album, I made her go splits on Snoop Dogg Doggy Style, so it was fine.
That's awesome. I actually couldn't think of a favourite song, weirdly. I also have, almost because it was like 98, I hate that Reef song, Place Your Hands.
Oh my God. I'm a huge Reef fan. I fucking love Reef. I saw them back in the early days. First stage dive I ever did was to a Reef concert, and they were great.
It wasn't in the 2000s, so I can't count it anyway, but it's the only Reef song I've heard. But any rock club that you've ever been into, for like, especially for us during uni, like that song was on and everyone loved it except for me. I just can't stand it. It's just that intro. Oh my! I'm
with you, Al. I'm with you, Al.
I can't stand it.
I have a similar kind of affection for that song as I do for Summer of '69 by Bryan Adams. They play it everywhere, and I do not. I don't understand how they've got this longevity beyond being a pretty terrible song. I mean, that song, it was released in 97, Place Your Hands, but its legacy in the 2000s, I think, qualifies it for some vitriol here because it was everywhere, and I never understood why, and I never will, and I never will like that song, so I'm with you, Al.
It's just a bad song. A bad song made by brilliant musicians, and I think that's kind of like that sums up the 2000s for me. Bad songs by brilliant musicians.
I've got some really interesting some things that will piss Martyn off coming, but Martyn can
Let's go for it, Tom. If you've got
so I'll start with I didn't group it. I just picked like a couple of things I hated about the 2000s. So the 2000s was the decade that Pete Waterman crawled out of his grave and ruined music again for the second time.
Yes. Yeah.
Because Pop Idol was 2000 and Pete Waterman, so he ruined music twice, once in the 80s and again in the 2000s.
I disagree with the 80s stuff. I think that the Pete Waterman, Stock Aitken Waterman stuff in the late 80s was brilliant. And I think Dan will agree with me.
Yeah, I said on a previous episode, Respectable by Malcolm is an absolute banger. They did some great stuff. I think You Spin Me Round Like a Record by Dead or Alive is a great song as well.
And any Rick Astley song, man.
Yeah, they did a lot within the genre of high energy. A lot of the songs are good. I'm loath to say that I dislike what Pete Waterman contributed to music in the 80s, but I'm certainly with Tom on him being at least partly responsible for the rise of reality TV he
was just trying to get extra extensions to his train set.
I think he probably got quite a few extensions for his train set as well, at the expense of any semblance of popular culture existing. That was one. The other one was the other worst thing about the 2000s was the demise and the resurgence of a pale reflection of the Smashing Pumpkins. So Smashing Pumpkins in the 90s were one of the greatest bands in the world at the time. They sold gazillions of records. Melancholy and Infinite Sadness is one of the best double albums ever made. They signed off with Machina and Machina 2 in 2000, and you're thinking, yes, this is going to be great. I'm going to have another decade of great music. And in 2001, they split up and disappeared, and I was devastated. And then in 2007, they decided to reform. And there's another reformation coming up as well that was also should never have happened. And they reformed and released Zeitgeist, which is up there with the worst albums I've ever bought, not only because it's a bad album made by great musicians, but also because it has dreadful songs and dreadful production. It's just a bad album made by a band under the name I love with only 2 of them. So that was one of my worst things of the 2000s. And then the worst album I bought in the 2000s was Chinese Democracy by Guns N' Roses.
You bought that?
I did buy it.
I never listened to it. I just heard it was bad and didn't bother.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I bought it. I pre-ordered it.
You pre-ordered it? I didn't know you liked Guns N' Roses.
I don't. But I was being
pre-order stuff I like.
So I was going through a phase from about 2005 to 2009, where on and off I was trying to be a music journalist, and that was going to be an album that a review was quite important, and so I decided I'd pre-order it and get it on the day of release and get a review out and listen to it and realised I couldn't write anything about it because it was a heap of shit.
I'm kind of disappointed that was the reason why you pre-ordered it. I kind of wanted to, I just got into like Guns N' Roses really hard.
I have tried so hard to get into Guns N' Roses, but it does nothing for me. There was a lot of like nostalgia. I think every decade has nostalgia for previous decades, and I think there was a lot of like, I remember Yes played at Plymouth Pavilions in the 2000s, and I'm there thinking, why the hell do I want to go and see a group of guys who made amazing music in the early 70s who are nearly dead, you know? And tribute acts as well. In 2005, I went to see a band called The Musical Box recreating Genesis gigs from 1972. Now, like, why would any? I paid to go and see that, but why? Why does it exist? Why do they try? Why? So there were several things I hated about the 2000s. Things I loved about the 2000s. Because I didn't spark. Oh, actually, no. The other thing I was going to say, just to piss Martyn off, is the 2000s was the decade when Radiohead forgot how to write songs.
Oh no! Oh. Don't even go there, man.
I love Radiohead and I love the atmosphere of the stuff in the 2000s, but like I wanted another OK Computer and we never got one.
Right, can I go next, Dan, please?
I haven't done good stuff yet. I've just ragged on it.
Right. No.
I think
you ended that with the Radiohead.
I'm not allowed to speak anymore.
I think we'll allow. We'll come back to you, Tom, but I think we'll allow Martyn his chance to retort.
Okay, right. Okay, Tom. Your band. I'm just rolling the fag right now. Okay, I need to compose myself for a second there. I'm going to talk about the worst first, and I'm going to say one word: auto-tune. We've done that. That's past. That's history. We've already discussed it.
We believe in life after love.
Oh my fucking god! My fucking god! Dan, why did you do that to me, man?
It's so religious when you talk about auto-tune.
Anyway, right, okay, the best thing, 2000s, you had the worst period in music I think I've ever known. The late 90s, so post-Britpop, you had bands like Keane, Travis, Coldplay. Oh my God, it was such a dirge. It was such a difficult time to get through. And there was very little that was happening. Even bands like, not bands, artists like Aphex Twin, his music was even fucking like not very good at that point. So we were all desperate for just something to fucking like kick into place at that point. Now, what happened in 2001, it's post 2000, you have the new rock revolution, which NME and Melody Maker and all the publications fucking kicked off. The Strokes, the White Stripes, all of those bands.
How dare you name those two bands as bands which prove a generation was good? They were rubbish.
Strokes. They were fucking amazing. They kind of like the White Stripes and the Strokes were probably the best thing that has happened to music since like the early 90s. It was the new Nirvana. It was like, we're gonna throw away that whole like new metal, and we're gonna throw away all that like dirgy music that we've been having to deal with for so long. Acoustic guitar fucking nonsense, horrible music. And you had these garage punk bands coming out, and the White Stripes and the Strokes, they're not my favourite bands, even though I have a very deep love for Jack White. But anyway, I'm just going to really be quick about this because I don't really need to say much about it because the music speaks for itself. You had two scenes that came out that absolutely changed music. Firstly, you had the punk funk scene. So what I'm talking about is live bands that play dance music, and the foremost of those bands, LCD Sound System, DFA Records. It was just, man, fucking they changed things. It was like suddenly music got exciting again. And you have to look at the social scene back then as well. Like 9/11 happened, and they absolutely closed down
the best of the 2000s.
Yeah, well, they closed down the party scene in New York, but you had these underground bands coming up, and New York was vibrant as fuck. So you had LCD Sound System, you had the Yeah Yeahs, you had TV on the radio, Interpol. Oh man, Interpol. I can't tell you how much I love Interpol. Anyway, you had all these bands that were like, they're all Anglophiles. So basically what you had was these American bands in New York who loved English music. And they were listening to The Cure and Joy Division and fucking the shoegaze stuff from way back in the day. And they were just making it their own. And they were adding like a kind of like an energetic dance kind of a beat to it. So you had all that going on. And that was so inspiring. That stuff was very vibrant, very fucking exciting, and just kind of like, whoa. And it was cool as well. It wasn't just the music.
Well, it's kind of what started indie music, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in a sense, invented its own genre.
Yeah, totally.
Indie had been around indie was always around in the 90s as well.
Very popular though, you know what I mean? Like, there are phases where it was just like, I mean, there's so many indie bands that just kind of came and went, and then no one remembers,
Totally. But these bands that were coming through were remembering the indie bands that were not remembered, and they were like fucking like going, well, this is my inspiration. They were listening to the bands that I'm talking about were listening to bands like the Chameleons and early Joy Division and like fucking all these really obscure like 80s indie like English bands and making it their own. But they were adding dance beats to it. I mean, LCD Sound System. I mean, you cannot argue with that band.
But they were making it mainstream, weren't they? Like, as much as people may like Joy Division, like, to come from Joy Division to like, for example, Kaiser Chiefs. One's just more radio friendly. That's all it was.
No, you're dead on there. And what happened was you had these really cool bands, really good bands like TV on the Radio, for instance. And then you had all these other like periphery bands who were like capitalizing on that kind of like that success, and like Kaiser Chiefs, and and it became boring in the end. But at that time, the Rapture, for instance, like it was harsh music.
Echoes.
It's popular harsh music. It is. But I'm going to move on from that, and I'm going to say LCD Sound System are one of the greatest fucking bands of all time. Actually, it's not a band, it's one guy. It's one person. James Murphy is literally a genius. He is the David Bowie of our times. Anyway, moving on. I'm going to talk about Black Rebel Motorcycle Club are literally were the best thing that ever happened in 2000s, and here's why. Because they basically took all of the influences of indie and shoegaze and post-rock from the 80s. They were Jesus and Mary Chain, they were Ride, they were fucking My Bloody Valentine, all of those combined, and they came out of nowhere, and I hated them when I first saw them. I saw them on the cover of NME, and they're all wearing leather and that, and I was like, oh, here we go, another fucking leather-clad rock band. And then I heard them, and I was like, that sounds like every single one of my favourite bands all in one go.
I do really like the first Black Rebel Motorcycle Club album. Actually, there are a couple of really, really good tracks on there. The second album had a great sound, but the songs weren't quite as strong. Then they got dropped from their record label and came back as an acoustic American folk band, which was a bit interesting. So post-rock was my favourite thing of the 2000s. So post-rock existed in Talk invented it arguably, and then there were some bands there were some bands in the 90s like Junior 44 and stuff like that doing some really interesting stuff, and obviously Mogwai and Godspeed You Black Emperor both formed in the 90s. But in the 2000s there were online web scenes like the Silent Ballet that were just collating this music by all these amazing post-rock bands, and because it didn't have vocals, it's quite I'm not going to say easy to record, but vocals can make or break a lot of bands. And so post-rock usually doesn't have vocals or uses samples. And so it was just musicians making beautiful music, often very, very heavy. And that in the 2000s, that scene was brilliant. Bands like Mono from Japan, This Will Destroy You, Explosions in the Sky, Godspeed You Black Emperor hit their peak. That was one of them. And then I was going to sort of mirror Martyn's point about the indie rock scene. The British indie scene in the early 2000s was really my thing. My Vitriol released their debut in 2001.
Great album that is.
Muse, Origin of Symmetry, Absolution, Black Holes and Revelation.
The early 2000s was a halcyon days for guitar music. It was just all about guitars. Yeah. And I'm going to argue with you on this, Tom.
Yeah.
Radiohead, Kid A, came out in 2001.
2000. Came out in 2000.
That was my first Radiohead album.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Radiohead are literally the greatest band who have ever existed. They are
every band.
They are going to be the.
What about 9 Inch Nails, Ryan?
Well, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club.
Oh yeah, whatever. But no, Radiohead is something else. And Radiohead, they went from OK Computer. They released probably the greatest album of all time. I would argue, and I will argue it to the death. OK Computer, but when they evolved to the more electronic side of things, and oh man, just everything Radiohead released in that decade was just the most perfect music you will ever hear. In 30 years' time, people will be talking about Radiohead like the way people talk about the Beatles nowadays.
No.
Radiohead are literally the greatest band who have ever fucking...
I don't mind Radiohead. I do quite like them, but come on, they're not that good.
No, they are that good.
I think I like OK Computer. I think that's their best work. I really like the Bends.
I should say I bought Kid A, I bought Amnesia. I don't dislike them. It's just that they stopped. So what annoys me about Radiohead is they're releasing Kid A and Amnesiac at a time when post-rock's kicking off, and they're getting all this credit for doing this really interesting stuff, when in the post-rock scene, which is the scene I was quite into at the time, that was already being done. They were riding on the coattails of other lesser-known bands. I'm not saying they're bad records, but they Kid A and Amnesiac. If Kid A was a debut album for a rock band, it wouldn't have sold.
I stand by my point. I think Radiohead are they're the most inventive, most talented group of musicians who have ever formed a band.
Dave, I think I want to go to you in this conversation. I think you might have some interesting things to tell us about what were your personal tastes in the 2000s. What were the best things? What were the worst things?
Please say Limp Bizkit.
So, more predominantly going over to rock. I'm moving away from that subject. So, one of the albums I was going to suggest as a positive was At the Drive-In.
Yes!
Rebel. Yes.
Dave, you legend. You fucking legend, man. At the Drive-In, yes.
But in my defense, I'm going to go the complete opposite direction and go towards hip-hop and funk, which
Okay.
I love to do.
Definitely down with that.
So I was in two minds about selecting Outkast's Speakerbox / The Love Below, the double album.
Yes.
Which was a really good album that I owned in 2001, I presume?
It came out in 2003.
Came out in 2003. I may have brought it up on episode 1.
Oh, yeah. So I would have had it in beginning of university, I suppose. It seems that at that point in my life, I was pretty on top of albums. I was going to talk about The Streets, A Grand Gunt Home for Free as well, which I think came out the year later, 2004.
Yeah,
I never got into The Streets. I just can't see it.
that was pretty good. My usual cup of tea, but that was awesome. I loved it.
I saw the Streets supported Muse at Wembley in 2007, and he was actually really good.
Mike Skinner is an absolute genius. His lyrics are fucking awesome. He just talks about normal English life in a way that we all needed to hear in 2000.
I think that may be why I don't get The Streets, because I like my pomp and bombast with my pop stars. I like somebody who's completely alien. That's why, like Prince and David Bowie, my favourites. I mean, I in that era I like stuff like Lady Gaga. So.
You've always been like quite a sucker, well, not a sucker, that's the wrong word, but an enthusiast for quite flamboyant people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think that I've got a bit of a barrier there with The Streets, because it's just about normal stuff, and that thing kind of thing doesn't really do it for me.
Like
You're a Childish Gambino fan, and he talks about normal life.
Oh, he talks about normal life. He does it in a shocking and charismatic way, as opposed to kind of introspective and normal. I think a lot of I think I had a problem with grunge for that reason for the longest time, but now eventually I kind of see the musicianship in it. They kind of tone down. I like my 80s stuff. I like people in suits. I like big hair, and when grunge kind of changed the
like entertainers,
changed the tone. Yeah, I like
synchronized dancing. When did the bass player stop dancing as well? What's that about?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Dave.
No, that's fine.
Don't want to get stuck on the streets.
I have settled on my choice in the plus direction on Daft Punk Discovery 2001.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
That was that. There was some great stuff like Daft Punk. I remember being at university in 2005, and that whole indie electro thing, because it was like there was Simian Mobile Disco and Justice and Daft Punk.
I nearly went Justice Cross.
I think Justice are so superior to Daft Punk. Their work is so...
I think that now, at the time, I thought the Daft Punk were the best thing in the world, until I heard that they pretty much just ripped off most of the songs from old funk songs, which I found out later. And they
there's
hardly changed at all.
Yeah, there's that, what's this, it's Cola Bottle Baby.
Cola Bottle Baby by Edwin Birdsong.
Birdsong, yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's exactly the same as Harder, Better, Stronger, Fast.
Well, I thought Discovery was great. It's the first electronic album I ever got into as well. That was brilliant.
Used to be a really good night on underneath the New Continental Hotel in Plymouth called Neon Kibosh that I think Franz used to run. No, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head now. He'll absolutely murder me next time I bump into him down the pub. But it was a really good night that concentrated just on that kind of indie electro thing. So yeah, like Hot Gossip, and
there was a lot of stuff coming out from France back then. I remember, like
French disco rebirth. Yeah, it's kind of like Italo disco, but Italo disco never really had a bounce back. But French big time did, yeah. It kind of like morphed into electro disco and electro house, which was like Busy P, A-Track, Vampire Blood, like loads of other like house acts that came after them, and the Headbangers record label. But yeah, that was really good. I like that era of music. But on the flip side, I've chosen one really shitty album and two linked shitty singles. So I'm hitting you with The Darkness's first album.
Ooh.
Oh, that is not a bad album. How dare you?
I like that album.
Absolute and utter fucking diatribe shite. That is
I love that
rip-off of Queen, and secondary controversial, but I also think Queen is shit.
I agree with you on that. We'll agree on that.
People just got carried away and started to enter them into popular culture, and people forgot that they were basically the Darkness in the 70s.
I have a very strange relationship with Queen. I do own all of their albums, but I don't like any of their albums apart from A Night at the Opera. I think that's the only good album they ever did. However, there are a lot of singles that I do like, so I wouldn't go as far as saying that they were shit, but I do think that they are a contender for being one of the most overrated bands in history.
Well, I think they suffer from a thing where their best songs are really good, but their worst songs are really bad. And if you listen to one of their albums, you will like maybe 7 out of the 12. And the ones that are bad are enough to ruin the album, but you can't deny some of the jams on the other tracks,
Their best songs, in inverted commas. I realise that we're an audio podcast and people can't see me doing air quotes. But like their best songs, in inverted commas, are like tub thumping anthems, and there's like I like a bit of introspection in my music rather than just something for drunk people to sing.
I want to draw a line underneath Queen. They're not really relevant to the 2000s.
Yes, we're going to move on quickly. On a quick subject, the only album you need to listen to is called Hot Space, 1982. Doesn't sound like Queen, hence not shit. We're moving on.
Under pressure.
The thing about Queen is like one of those bands where...
No, Martyn. Underline.
Amazing musicians.
We're moving on to The Darkness, Martyn. Your opinion on The Darkness, please.
I actually really enjoyed Permission to Land as a slice of cheesy comedy rock because they never pretended to be serious, whereas Queen pretended to be a serious band. But The Darkness, it was the comparison that Dave drew. The Darkness never, on their first album, never pretended to be anything but stupid. So it was a bit of fluff. I really enjoyed it. That said, their Christmas single is one of the worst songs of the 2000s.
Don't Let the Bells End is great.
It's not great. It's not. It's
They're
just
all shite.
I bought the single. I actually bought the Darkness's Christmas single, and I have listened back to it recently. And I bought it and hated it, but I bought it because it was the Darkness, and I quite liked Permission to Land. And then I listened to it again recently. Still shit.
I tell you what, though, Darkness, great guitar players.
Oh, here we go again. Great musicians, bad choices. Well, I'll tell you what, if they're a great musician, maybe they should play some fucking good music then, because they've done some shit albums.
Dead right. A bit like Queen.
No.
Great musicianship.
By the way, last year they released an album called Easter is Cancelled, which is probably top of the shit albums that I've ever heard of.
What's even funnier is The Darkness are playing Download next year.
All right. Well, that's the number one target for my piss bottles. So the last selection on the shit list that I've selected as my singles they're a double back-to-back, although they were released individually, is a song by Imarion called Fuck It, I Don't Want You Back, and then the rewitch from Frankie was Fuck You Right Back, which was an absolute and utter fucking shit show.
Yeah, that was
Every
horrendous.
time I went out to a pub or a club during that period of time, I hated the 3 to 4 minutes that they
It wasn't a Marion. It was
Amons. That was it. Yeah.
Amon. Yes, we don't want to misrepresent a Marion.
Icebox. That was a banger.
Yeah, that was a particularly terrible song, and it was everywhere as well. I think you couldn't escape that one. And then when they released The Reply, which was so clearly a marketing ploy, it was just, it was completely unrelenting. An attempt to be sincere that was so on the nose that it couldn't see its own failings. And it was just terrible, but somehow it sold, and somehow The Reply sold. And what happened to either of those? Nothing. They both. I think
that's the only thing I've seen that was similar to it is in the 90s. You had No Scrubs, and then there was a retort by a rapper called No Pigeons, but he wanted to call it No Vultures.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. That was nowhere near as good as No Scrubs either. Which, yeah, I mean that's a great song. That would be possibly a contender for undeniable banger. I think No Scrubs.
Great song.
I can never be on board with it. I'm a dude. I can't be on team female for it. I just couldn't be it. Even if it works, I like to back the pigeon blokes. What you got? Gender traitors or something? What's going on here?
I think we're going to start with the bad, and then I'll move on to some of the good. I think the worst thing for me in the 2000s was the kind of advent of ringtone hip hop. So you saw like in the early 2000s, I remember things like Jamster on TV all the time.
Ringtone.
Yeah, and you could text like 60 quid to this random dude's number, and they'd send you like a really crap MP3 file of the Crazy Frog. But songs became popular that way. So it became about making songs that were just. It's kind of, we're still seeing the effects of it now in like meme songs where you get songs that are released purely just to go viral. And I think that was the kind of start of that in the early 2000s, when you've got ringtone songs, and you've got songs like Soulja Boy. That's it. Crank that Soulja Boy. It's basically 10 seconds looped over and over.
I was talking about Crazy Frog. I wonder how well that did. Just to make the album Crazy Hits, the first one was platinum in Sweden, and like gold, platinum ×2. It was ridiculously popular. This thing sold millions.
And you couldn't get away from it. It was so ubiquitous, and we're still seeing the effects of it now, where songs can be essentially a 10-second loop of something that's amusing or different, and then they build a whole song off of that. And those songs will never go away. And we have the early 2000s and almost the rise of the internet and the ease of access to things through downloading it on a computer all the time. It's just left us with this void of songs that are designed to, their only purpose is to stick in your head as an earworm, but they don't bother with the mechanics of the song anymore. Not like in the 60s, where you would get Motown hits that were obviously designed to be earworms, but they had the musicianship with it. And now songs were about trying to be on someone's MySpace. Like, you get 10 seconds at the start of a song to hook someone in, and it's just a fight.
I think that's definitely got worse, but I think Ernie the Fastest Workman in the West or Get Down on It, Suck My Helmet are also but it's casualties of that same zeitgeist.
It all arises from the way people can listen to music, though. So I remember something in the 90s and Bjork doing an interview where she talked about mixing her records to sound good on laptop speakers, because that was how people were going to listen to music. And so a lot of these songs, and it's like, if you walked around the city centre in the 2000s, the 12 and 13-year-olds would be there on their phones listening to music on their phones. Yeah. And so there's no bass in it. You know, you can't get bass. You're not going to get surround sound. Like, I've tried listening to post-rock on a smartphone. It doesn't work. And so the music is being made for teenagers, because they buy the most records, to listen to on their phones when they're sat on a park bench drinking White Lightning.
Interestingly, you mentioned the lack of bass. One of the biggest hits of that era that Martyn's touched upon before is the Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes. The song doesn't have any bass. It's actually just guitars.
It is really good, though, and weirdly, it's one of the first songs I learned on the bass.
Yeah, none of their songs have any bass because there's only two of them.
Yeah, exactly. Staying on some of the kind of bad things that happened. I have briefly mentioned it earlier, but the kind of rise of reality TV. was a particular, and I know that's an external factor and it's not created by the music industry itself, but it had such a massive and prolonged effect on the music industry that I think it would be remiss of me to mention it. And I think we've mentioned Pop Idol started in 2000, and then by the end of the decade, everything that was successful was down to the fact that it appeared on one of the reality shows, and the charts got ruled by it, and it was unbearable. There were so many years that you look back on and go, that's the biggest selling single of that year, and you're like, well, I don't really want to hear John Johns from Rotherham do a cover of like Bram Van 3000 stringing in LA to a tinkly piano cry ballad in front of an audience of like millions. It's not something that I have any interest in. So there's a massive dirge of music throughout the whole decade that's just unappealing in 2020 because it's tainted by the fact that it was just a popular
John Rotherham. It's fucking amazing.
So yeah, I think reality TV it did have a massive kind of impact. And again, like the ringtone thing, we are still feeling the effects of that.
I don't know. I think Crazy Frog was the voice for generation.
I have this theory that the Crazy Frog was actually rescued as a child, as a tadpole, from the clutches of Paul McCartney's Frog Chorus, and he escaped and followed a slightly different career path to release a solo single, which is the Crazy Frog, and everyone hated it as much as the Frog Chorus. That's why you've never heard from him again.
Take 5 minutes to talk about Bon Iver, who released forever ago in 2007.
Yeah, that's a great
record. Absolutely beautiful.
Who was also heavily influenced and worked with Kanye on My Beautiful Dark Fantasy, and was probably one of the most influential experimental folk musicians that I've listened to in the last sort of 20 years, like up there with
Elliott Smith,
Bob Dylan, Neil Young, those kind of people in my eyes.
His second album, the opening track on that, Perth, has one of the most perfect intros. It was the music on my alarm clock for years. Was Perth, because it's such a nice bit of music to wake up to.
And what's interesting about Bon Iver's first album, he was really, really depressed, and he moved to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and he totally was like kind of like mega depressed and stuff, and he just went there on his own, totally isolated, and he just recorded that first album on his own. Like, he was heartbroken, he split up with his girlfriend, he was just in this fucking cabin. He would add an effect to his vocals, like a delay effect. That became then the kind of norm.
He influenced T-Pain.
Oh, he's kind of like the daddy of inventing bizarre effects on things, and it's kind of like created quite a lot of vocal samples and has done loads of weird production techniques. Like, they used to crunch up audio tapes and like scribble on them and stuff, and just that would obviously blank out the recording sound, and they just leave it in the album, and he'd sample weird things. And
it was amazing. Bon Iver
really
was
cool guy,
fucking. Bon Iver is incredible. He's just released something recently. I haven't heard it, but I bet it's brilliant. He was a big influence on like a lot of the English indie bands like Elbow and Doves and people like that.
James Bay and a few other people, they stole a lot of his shit, and he was always like really humble about it, and And nice.
Yeah, very humble, absolutely humble. Like just he's a genius, but he's not. He doesn't buy into that. He's kind of like he does his thing.
He's got like massive appeal over multiple genres as well. And he still mentions his name, and people don't know who the fuck you're talking about.
After I add it to the listening list,
I want to kind of nominate two things: an album and a single that I think are my personal, I guess, most hated albums and songs of that decade. I think we've praised Madonna in a couple of episodes. I think we talked about the Ray of Light album on both episodes.
Mm-hmm. Not quite the 2000s now.
No, exactly. That's not the album I'm referencing now. Because that in 2003 she then released American Life. It's not very good at all. There's a single called Hollywood, which was, I remember, being particularly awful.
The problem with her is she's an incredible artist, don't get me wrong, but she leans very heavily on her production people that she's with. So Rogers obviously created her, and Ray of Light was an incredible album for multiple different reasons. But obviously this ran out. She didn't have the money or the backing or interest for anyone to be decent on American Life.
Yeah, it's interesting because it came out in 2003, and that's the era where she probably should have been working with people like the Neptunes and Pharrell, and she didn't, and it's very boring, it's very dull, and it doesn't enhance her career at all. And I don't know if she did recover in 2005, Confessions on the Dance Floor, which had the big hit Hung Up, but I still think artistically she never recovered. Her career has been in the toilet since 2000 from a critical point of view. Sales figures, she did okay up until about 2008. I think 4 Minutes was a hit with Justin Timberlake and Timbaland. I don't want to shit on Madonna too much. I do like a lot. Maybe bad choice of words, but I do think she did a lot of great records in the 80s, so I don't want to be too harsh on her, but that is a particularly bad album.
She just went through her phase, didn't she, where she tried to look young forever by going really muscular and thinking about... I know it's kind of, it's quite hard. It's the same reason why Blink-182 are rubbish now. You can't be like 50 and sing about like teenage problems, and it just gets a bit weird. Yeah,
it's a bit odd, and that started to creep in. I think that happened with a lot of artists around that era. I noticed that that era I would consider to be that it's Prince's weakest decade. I think it's also David Bowie's weakest decade, including the 80s. So I'd say it was a difficult time in music. I think if I could nominate one song that I think is my least favourite during that time, I think I haven't actually looked at what year it came out in, but I believe System of a Down's BYOB came out in the 2000s. And I cannot understand why that song exists. That's how bad it is.
It starts off all right, doesn't it? But as soon as it goes to that sha-la-la-la-la, from there on, it's just awful. I don't know whoever
2005.
See that song.
It does qualify.
See, that's what I find really weird about that song, right? Is because it was Mesmerised and Hypnotised, wasn't it? The two albums, and this is the first. Have I got that? And it was the first single off the first one of those two albums. Now, if you take those two albums and pick out all the good tracks, you can make one good album out of it, and. So it's almost as if somebody should have said, no, make one album and BYOB wouldn't have been on it. Yet for some reason, they were allowed to not only put BYOB on one of the albums, but release it as the first single. Which
that song was bad enough for me to straight up just stop listening to them altogether. I've never gone back to System of a Down since. To be honest, I'm a bit like that music. I'll like them until they do one bad song, and I'm just like, well, nah, that's it. I just won't bother following them. It's bad, really.
Yeah, I never really liked them. I think Chop Suey's okay, and then they brought out that, and I was like, well, that's a band I have no interest in listening to, because that song sounds like what would happen if a dog was left in a car and was daydreaming, but it had also defecated itself. I don't want to use the word cacophony in a bad sense when we're on a podcast called the Cacophony Sessions, but it is a cacophony of shite.
Yeah, they did some great stuff like Toxicity. I really liked that track.
I mean, I like the first two albums. I thought they were really cool, but there's one thing with System of a Down, especially, like people because they're political. I didn't like a lot of the lyrics, to be honest. I think a lot of the metaphors are just like there's being metaphorical, then there's just being completely random.
Yeah,
like like. So if you listen to some lyrics, what was it? Planting seeds as a pastime activity, the toxicity. What the hell does that even mean? What planting seeds? What? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, their lyrics are basically just gibberish. I mean, it's got the stuff about rising from the tablecloth in BYOB, and it's just, where are you getting these random images? How are you associating? They're meant to be a politically driven band as well. Yeah. So if you don't understand the message the song is supposed to be bringing, then it's kind of self-defeating, I think, in that if it's too obscure, then nobody's getting it, or what I suspect is actually the case, that they just don't really know what they're writing.
So we're just all just too stupid to understand the brilliance of System of a Down.
Potentially. I always hate to be too negative on this podcast. So I did want to talk about some things that I did think are really good from the 2000s, and there's quite a lot. But I looked at the artists who were really successful in that era. You've got Eminem, and I think his best work was in the 90s. I did go back and listen to the Marshall Mathers LP, and I think it's dated horrendously because it's quite homophobic in places. It makes it difficult to listen to. And I think there's a lot of that in the era. But I do think there's a lot of good music that came out from him in the hip hop scene at the time. Was heading in a decent direction, and it had its massive impact on pop music as a whole. So rather than your sugary sweet clean-cut boy bands, they're suddenly getting a bit of a hip-hop element in their music. So what NSYNC did, for instance, was go from bubblegum pop, and suddenly they're working with the Neptunes, and they're working with Nelly, and it's expanding the sound into a more urban style. And I do think there's a lot of good singles in the early 2000s. I think Justin Timberlake releases Like I Love You on the album Justified, which I think is a phenomenal album, and I don't think he ever bettered it. A lot of people would say Future Sex Love Sounds, but I think Justified is his best effort, and I
Cry Me a River, because I like that one.
Yeah, that's it. Cry Me a River's from Justified.
There you go. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's a really good album, and there's a lot of urban pop at that time, and there's a lot of Neptune's influenced singles around that time. That then gave way sort of around 2006, 2007. Timbaland becomes more prominent, and I think he kind of ruled the last half of the decade with his kind of mainstream influence. Again, Justin Timberlake was synonymous with that change in sound as well, because he morphed from Justified to Future Sex Love Sounds, which I think was a great move, and I think had a lot of influence on what pop music was doing at the time. I think one song I wanted to point out in particular that was, I think, really good and really important was Aaliyah's More Than a Woman. It came out in 2001 before she tragically died too early, but that's an important song for setting the sound of what R&B is going to be in that decade. Timbaland's all over it with his kind of weird percussion noises, and his kind of staggered beat is fantastic, and it did have a massive effect on other pop songs at the time. Same year, you've got the Gorillaz with Clint Eastwood, which I think is an important single for that decade.
I bought it on single, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I bought that on single as well, and I think
I bought the album. I really like that album. Actually, I like the first two albums.
Argument that I'm going to get in trouble for.
Okay, go on.
Oasis v. Blur. I always take the side of Blur because of Gorillaz.
Yeah.
Because Oasis never really went forward and reinvented themselves as something completely radically different as that. And Alban, I think, was really clever to get on board with Gorillaz, and they produced some really good stuff with some really prominent artists.
I think I was in the other camp with Oasis, because I think for me, Gorillaz, I only had Clint Eastwood, and I didn't really like the other ones. You know what I mean?
I would say Dare's a great song. El Manana, and Dirty Harry is a good tune as well. They've got a few good songs actually, and I think
they're still releasing good stuff, man.
Yeah, and I think that they kind of introduced the public to what was going on in the kind of indie rock scene that people weren't. I mean,
is that like hip hop and trap? And everything.
I mean, Del the Funky Homo Sapien is on that record.
Yeah.
He did some great stuff.
Do you know what? Right, he is incredible. Gorillaz are great. So Blur, though. Like I used to be an Oasis guy. But I'm a Blur man now.
I have to say, I never liked either.
I think
Of course you didn't.
the reason why I wanted to bring up the Gorillaz song as being important is I think without that it's one of the first examples of a song that I can remember hearing and not being able to classify what genre it actually was. And I think around the 2000s it became more prevalent for bands to experiment with different genres. So you've got weird crossovers like Ice Cube appearing with Korn. I know that was a few years before, but around this kind of era, you've got the Gorillaz are working with hip hop, underground hip hop artists like Del the Funky Homo Sapien, but they're also working with people like Tina Weymouth from formerly of Talking Heads, and you've got the strange Japanese culture that they're bringing in. I think Noodle, the lead singer, she's represent real voice is a Japanese singer. I forget her name. I'm sorry, but. Yeah, I think that we see a really melting pot with the Gorillaz of all these different genres coming together and becoming more mainstream. It becomes more easy to have bands that you would never put together working on the same record. And I think the 2000s was great for bringing stuff like that. And you've got very odd records. Another one I wanted to mention was Crazy by Niles Barkley, 2006. I think that is an incredible example of something like
Danger Doom and all Resistance of. Yeah, they're great albums.
Yeah, it is. That song is, again, it's really difficult to kind of pitch it as being a certain genre. It's so different to what came before it. I remember, but it was so successful. Like Clint Eastwood, it was everywhere. But I never got tired of hearing that song. I think that did a lot for those kind of sounds, the odd sounds, the underground sounds becoming acceptable as a mainstream form. If you could market it, I guess this is the flip side of the ringtone era. If you can market something that is actually well produced and it is short and catchy, then that has helped it. So it's not entirely bad.
So I think you could make the argument that Clint Eastwood by Gorillaz is actually a new metal song. Like that song, and then this is like POD Alive. It's practically the same thing.
I can't quite hear that. I don't think. But so do we think that the 2000s? Then, if we had like a swingometer between like good and bad, do we think that where would it rank in terms of?
They were bleak times.
Yeah,
it's my favourite decade for music by a long way.
I disagree, and I'll give one reason. Black Rubber Motorcycle Club.
I think it's one of the worst decades for music. I think I'd say it's the worst since the 50s. I think the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2010s, and so far the 2020s are all better than the 2000s.
I think to summarise, it's like a juxtaposition decade where like people are coming to terms with the internet and coming to terms with new technology and are like stuck in the middle, and there's half of the old and half of the new, and it's kind of made a muddy colour in the middle. It's really great.
I think it depends on what background you come to music from. I think
hit the nail on the head. It's all about technology. How we listen to music now. I think
it's hard for us to accept that though, because like me, Tom, and like Whittle, we all grew up on that. Like the main problem really is like, obviously, yeah, you guys are right, but you got to remember, like, if you like for every album you listened to growing up in your teens, you were like, okay, that was amazing, that was hell of an era, that's cool. But for us, it is the 2000s, so I don't think we'll ever be able to agree that it was just.
You have to separate nostalgia from conjecture.
But age, isn't it? You know, but age, what you grew up listening
to. I would say quite comfortably that for guitar music, for guitar-based music, the 2000s was comfortably one of the better decades. Comfortably, like if you compare, so particularly the heavy guitar-based music coming out now, there's some good stuff, but like you look at a Download Festival lineup from the 2000s and from now, and it's virtually the same, but in the 2000s they were young, and new. You look at the Reading lineups from the 2000s. I think it was like 2007, 8, 9. Yeah,
but is that a tantamount that their music is good or that those festivals are bad?
It's the music's good. The music was great. You could fill a festival with good rock music in the 2000s.
Yeah, I went to a few of them. There's some fucking belters.
Yeah, like there's loads of underground bands I never even mentioned that were doing crazy things like Dan and Aykroyd and the Joy Formidable, and this is like 2007, 8, 9, and it was brilliant.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they are a good band. Yeah, absolutely. There's some great stuff. So I think
like Dave said at the drive-in, I think.
Yeah.
Fucking at the drive-in, man. They changed everything.
No,
they made it okay to play really sloppy, but really fucking punk as well.
And even Mars Volta was 2000, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, Mars Volta was 2000.
The big screaming golden head on a plate. I had that.
Yeah. Deloused in the Comatorium.
And also Queens of the Stone Age.
Thank you, Thomas.
Not a problem.
Queens of the Stone Age were like
2000s.
2000s.
Yeah,
They were
Songs for the Deaf, 2002.
Yeah, man, my God, what a Josh Homme, what a fucking hero. Also, Jack White. Every single project that Jack White has been involved in.
I think it was a good decade for rock music. It was good in a lot of places for pop music, but I do think that in my kind of tastes, there weren't a lot of great funk acts doing a lot of funk stuff. R&B was caught between this kind of. It wanted to sound. It wanted to be. Yeah, it wanted to be hip hop, but then it very suddenly wanted to be electronic and dance music, and it was such a transitional decade. It took a long time to find its feet.
The genres we like were massively chasing the tails at that point and trying to hutch on to anything they could to make sales, and driven by those facts. And maybe the artists didn't think that way, but the management definitely did.
Definitely,
I think the early 2000s was a guitar-driven music band. It was very much about the electric guitar. It's very much about like we're gonna like fucking, and it was always looking back as well. Garage punk revival, like it was all about like going, let's strip things back to how it was back in the day. Let's just have a fucking guitar and an amplifier in a room. And that was the 2000s. It was
talk about like punk bands. So we've completely breezed over. Like there's obviously Blink-182 started it, all, but there's like amazing bands like Refused, like Millencolin.
Refused, yes. Oh, Millencolin. You're a Millencolin fan. You fucking beaut.
Like there's loads, isn't there? There's so many bands like obscure ones, like the Beat Steaks. And so like punk was like back on the map in the 2000s.
It's so I think the 2000s was all about the electric guitar. It really was. It was all about. And Tom, I'm looking at you right now. Post rock as well. It was all about the electric guitar.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think my favourite album from that decade is probably Origin of Symmetry by Muse. That's the album I probably played the most. So I would I'd have to say, I mean, if you're looking at guitar music, it's a very positive time. If you're looking elsewhere, it's very transitional and very spotty.
It was all about the electric guitar. It's all about like kind of, we're going to strip things back. We're going to like just fucking plug in to a Marshall amp and a fucking Les Paul and just fucking play. And before that, it was all just too serious and stuff. And like, even a band like U2, they even stripped back at that point, you know? And like, it was all about stripping back, all about going like, let's cut away all of the fucking bullshit. Let's just fucking play music, man. The early 2000s literally was a fucking awesome time compared to like early 90s. It was so good. It was like kind of stripping away like all of the seriousness and just, let's have fun. Let's just fucking.
And running in parallel with that was the Insane Clown Posse.
Fucking magnets, man. How does that work?
Magnets. How do they work?
Thank you very much for listening to tonight's episode of the Cacophony Sessions. Hopefully, we've mentioned something that you understand from the decade of the 2000s. Did we do it justice? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to follow us on all your major podcast providers, and do give us a shout. We want to know what we are going to be discussing on future episodes. The next episode is going to be the best and worst movie soundtracks, so we'll leave you with that as a little bit of a taster. We're excited, and it's going to be a good one. So please remember, wherever you are, whatever you're listening with, remember to stay funky, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye. We're also going to talk about Prince in the next episode.
Definitely.